And I would like to invite my colleague and friend, Elana Gomel, to speak.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I had to miss most of this wonderful event today, but the reason I did was because I was doing what Hannah had taught me to do. I was teaching. And the title of my talk is 1984. It's not because we met in 1984. I am not going to name the year in which we met, and my talk may explain why exactly. But I do remember the first time I saw Hannah in class, and this was the first time I realized that teaching was fun. And it is fun. It's still fun. So even I'm totally exhausted, even though my voice is about to give out, and I hope you can still hear me, I enjoyed what I did today. And I enjoyed it, and I just realized when I was listening to Milad, I just realized that the subjects I was teaching today are Holocaust literature and the fairy tale. And those were the subjects I first heard in Hannah's classes. I remember when I was a TA in your narrative analysis, there was a unit on fairy tales, which totally opened my eyes. I never actually liked fairy tales. Oops, I see some of my students here. I never started, forget about it. I love fairy tales. But anyway, the first time I really realized that fairy tales could be a subject of serious academic discussion, could be fascinating to analyze, was in Hannah's class of narrative analysis. And the first time, well, not the first time, but the first time I was interested in Holocaust fantasy was in Hannah's class. In fact, I remember asking your permission, I think, to attend your MA seminar when I was an undergraduate, just to listen to your discussion of the White Hotel. And today, I was discussing Holocaust fantasy, and oops, I forgot to mention the White Hotel, which we'll do next time, people. Anyway, but back to 1984. It was a class on ideology and literature, which Milad mentioned. I don't think, in fact, it was the same class, because I remember it being on ideology and literature in general. And we were reading 1984. And this was not the first time I read 1984. The first time I had read 1984 in the Soviet Union, and I had to wear gloves as I was reading it, because my mother gave me a typewritten copy of it, and I had to be careful not to leave fingerprints as I was, leafing through the book. I only had it for one night, and I did. So and then I came to Hannah's class, and I read 1984 again, and I said, oh, I know what it's all about. I can write a really good paper. Because, of course, by this time, I knew that Big Brother was Stalin. And O'Brien was this KGB agent who used to come to our apartment uninvited, and he would be sitting in my mother's kitchen and drink tea and discuss Dostoevsky. And but the only hope for change I saw in 1984 was a character called Mrs. Parsons. She was a housewife. I don't know if you remember it. She's a very minor character. She's a housewife whose sink is permanently clogged. And I wrote a paper for Hannah about Mrs. Parsons and her clogged sink, in which I argued that the only hope in the fight against totalitarian evil were ordinary, normal human beings, such as Mrs. Parsons and her clogged sink, because I believed, and now I come to the crux of my discussion, because I'm sorry, Hannah, I no longer believe in it, but I used to believe. When I wrote paper for you, I absolutely believed that the lesson of my young pioneer childhood was that the only defense against Big Brother, and everything he represented was humanism. That studying at this time, I had already decided that my future was in the humanities. And so it seemed to me totally natural that humanism and the humanities go together, and that my future would be standing by the side of Mrs. Parsons and gently encouraging her to find beauty and dignity in her clothing. So after the USSR fell, I felt vindicated, as everything I had predicted came to pass. People were fed up with the atrocious transcendence offered by O'Brien. Again, if you remember 1984, O'Brien is a very articulate spokesperson for the kind of transcendence, ideological transcendence offered by Big Brother. And the fact that I even use the phrase ideological transcendence is all thanks to Hannah. Before your class, it would never occur to me to even put those words in the same phrase. And now I use the ideological transcendence in my sleep. Anyway, so after the Soviet Union fell, I was already at this time no longer a BA or even an MA student, but I felt finally, my paper was vindicated, and the Big Brother's reign was over, and surely now Mrs. Parson could afford a plumber, and surely once her physical needs were satisfied, she would turn to the treasures of the mind and read great literature. But that's not what happened. Ordinary people, it turned out, had no hidden reserves of goodwill to build a decent society on the ruins of a totalitarian utopia. True, they went shopping, as I expected, but once the novelty of shopping wore off, they felt nostalgic for the exaltation of violence, hatred, and persecution. Big Brother was dead, but Little Brother lived. Marx knew what he was saying when he quipped that history repeats itself twice, first as a tragedy, second as farce. And it was not only after the collapse of the USSR that humanism has proven to be disastrously wrong. While standards of living are rising across the globe, so are disaffection, anger, and hate. Mrs. Parsons, it turned out, has bred a whole generation of little Parsons who eagerly seize upon any new ideological toy as long as it promises a new enemy. So, where do we stand now, we in the humanities? Does it mean we still have to cling to humanism? Does it mean we still have to see ourselves as the last bastion of human values in the soulless world of mechanical toys and digital distractions? I used to believe it. I no longer believe it. I believe we have to acknowledge that humanism is a misguided and ultimately impotent ideology based on a willful misreading of science. Human beings are not intrinsically good. Equality and freedom are not unquestionable values rooted in human nature. Indeed, human nature itself is a jumble of contradictory impulses and fluid evolutionary imperatives that are constantly being reshaped by social conditioning. Posthumanism and transhumanism now attempt to map out the cultural landscape of the new age. And this landscape, the values that Winston Smith in 1984 risked his life for, are marginal at best and irrelevant at worst. Privacy? No. For Winston Smith, a room with a screen was a paradise. For me, it is hell. Knowledge for him was a precious commodity. Nowadays, it's as common and cheap as dirt. It turned out you don't need a thought police to brainwash people into believing nonsense. They eagerly do it themselves. Every man now is his own KGB. But does it mean that the humanities are obsolete? No, not at all. By separating from humanism, the humanities can renew and reinvigorate themselves. The main issue of the digital age is overspecialization. knowledge is freely available to all, but sorting and synthesizing through this massive amount of information is a much prized and much needed skill. The humanities teach the skill, together with other critical tools of survival in the digital economy, such as analytical thinking and mental flexibility. Liberal arts graduates are much in demand in the Silicon Valley. And this is what I think I thank Hannah for most of all, for teaching me how to think critically, how to analyze, how to say no, not how to say yes, but how to say no, and how to discard what is worn out in favor of what is new, how to welcome what Yeats called this beast, this crouching beast that is coming toward Bethlehem. I open my arms to this beast, and I hope all of us will too, because the beast is the future. But without the past, there is no future. Without this moment outside our classroom, when you told me, wow, it's a really good paper, it's an interesting paper, I'm glad you wrote it, there would be no future in the humanities for me. So without humanism, there would be no posthumanism and transhumanism. So thank you for giving me the future, Hannah.